Well, hey, welcome all you wiretappers out there. Good to be back here in the studio of Gangland Wire. This is Gary Jenkins, retired Kansas City Police Intelligence Unit detective here in Kansas City. And guys, I was talking with a fan not too long ago from Chicago, I think on the maybe the Facebook group, and he said you need to do more Chicago stories. And I had to admit I hadn't done that many Chicago stories. I got caught up in New York a lot, it seemed like. And anyhow, we're back to Chicago, and another guy, I was mentioning it to another guy, and we were talking, and somebody said, I don't remember who, maybe that original fan said, you need to get Chuck Goudie on there. He's been doing a lot of reporting on the outfit over the years, and I didn't really know who Chuck was, so I started searching. He did a recent story about the death of the last Spilotro brother, John Spilotro. So I thought, man, this is it. This is what I got to do. So welcome, Chuck Goudie from Chicago.
Well, it's quite an introduction. Some might call it a eulogy, even, but thankfully that's not what it is.
Really? Now, I think I told you earlier, last time I interviewed a Chicago newsman, it was John Bulldog Drummond. Bulldog Drummond, I tell you what, he was the dean of Chicago newsmen, television newsmen when it came to reporting on the mob. There's no doubt about it. And so I really welcome you, Chuck. You're kind of the new modern John Drummond.
Thanks, Gary, for that. I'm happy to be mentioned in the same sentence or thought with John Drummond. I had the good fortune of working kind of side by side with him, different networks in the 1980s and into the 90s when he was still at it. And he certainly did. He set the stage for mob coverage in Chicago, the outfit as it's known here. And John is still up and at 'em. And the times that I've spoken to him recently, we talk about the fact that on TV news in Chicago, I'm kind of the last person standing to keep track of these things, and so it's a heavy case of documents, as we say, to carry around these days. But there's still interest in it in Chicago, with not only the history of it, but where things stand in 2025.
Yeah, I've noticed that on the Facebook groups, and they're real heavily participated in might be the right word, because a lot of comments, a lot of people know, a lot of family members of mob guys that seem like are participating.
It's true.
So you got to be careful what you say if you live up there. Kind of like that here in Kansas City. I kind of have to be careful. We got all these family members around.
That is true. Well, I'm always careful, and I do hear from people when I report on the deaths of old timers or even new guys who are trying to run the show these days. People do pay attention to it. That's for sure.
Yeah, they still got something going. Kind of what would you say? Just to encapsulate what the outfit is today in Chicago.
Well, there is a little bit of a range as to what the outfit status is these days, depending on who you talk to. The FBI still contends that the outfit is operating, that there are people who are still in positions of power, and that the street crews are still in place as they were even 50 years ago. Everybody seems to agree that it doesn't have the numbers that it once did. And I think that should be evident. Some people think there may be only 10 or 15 day-to-day active members of the Chicago mob these days. But I think most people agree that it's in the dozens, but certainly no more than 100. And the rackets are the same, similar kinds of things, but not the amount of money trading hands these days. But they still run in the same circles. It's still the same rackets that we saw decades ago in Chicago. Loan sharking, prostitution, a healthy illegal gambling business that the outfit oversees, even as gambling largely is legal here and other places these days. Some union racketeering underway still. So the same kinds of things, maybe just not as potent as it once was.
Interesting. So speaking of the union racketeering, now let's go back into history a little bit. You were in Kansas City during the Strawman trials when that's when really to me it was the peak of the outfit's national influence at that point in time, because they owned the Teamsters and the Teamsters pension fund and can make all those loans. So that was quite a time, wasn't it?
those days of Strawman in Kansas City was the heyday, certainly in terms of dollars changing hands and the interconnection between the Kansas City mob, Chicago outfit, Cleveland, to some degree, New York, and some organized crime families in the Northeast, and then Las Vegas obviously was the linchpin of it all, at least when it came to Strawman.
Yeah, and that's when really Tony Spilotro, his name rose to the top where it wasn't before. I listened to a wiretap where Joe Agosto was in Las Vegas, is reading a newspaper to Tuffy DeLuna about that somebody was writing out there and said Spilotro and Iupa moving west, and Nick Savella in the background says, "Oh God."
Well, as you know, there's a body of thought that Tony Spilotro basically engineered his own demise by the way he operated in public, and if he had just kept quiet and not been as public about it, he probably would still be around today.
Now, so we're into the Spilotro family. The demise of the Spilotro family. That's John Spilotro. I'd never heard of him. Tell the guy, and I don't think most people have. Tell us about him a little bit.
I had never heard of John Spilotro either. I probably saw him on a list of Spilotro family members years ago, but he wasn't a major player. He certainly kept the quietest of all the Spilotros, certainly far more than his brother Tony did. John Spilotro lived in Vegas. Apparently went out there with the other brothers who landed in Vegas in the late 70s, early 80s. And John Spilotro kept quiet, although he was thought to be involved in a number of the rackets that the Spilotros, most notably Tony, got involved in the early days out there, the Hole in the Wall gang and other things that we're familiar with. And so when I heard that John Spilotro had died, I thought it was worth a TV news story. Certainly here in Chicago, that's a notorious family, infamous, if you will. And it was interesting to us, and I was to viewers, that this was the last of the Spilotro crime family, as we put it. And so that was the story that we did a few weeks ago after hearing John had died.
Now, I believe he ran the Gold Rush, which was a notorious pawn shop and jewelry place, and was a notorious fence for stolen goods from all over the southwest part of the United States. So he had to know something, didn't he?
Absolutely, and I don't think anybody disputes that. But back then, you knew that it was Tony who was in charge of the family business and the outfit business in Las Vegas, and so he kind of fell into line and knew his place. I think. I talked to his son shortly after he died, who was an attorney, a very well considered, well regarded attorney in Las Vegas. Talked about his father's death. He knows exactly what happened over the years. It's not a high point, especially for somebody who went to law school, is now a practicing member of the bar and knows how these things work. But it was still his father, and so he and I spoke kind of candidly for a few minutes about this. And it's always an interesting story to me, and it's one that I have told over the years. You have members of quote unquote organized crime families, many of whom were known to the feds, did penitentiary time, were vigorously pursued and prosecuted by the authorities. Nobody more so than the Spilotros over the years, some of them in any case. But this young man, now a grown adult and a practicing attorney, he grew up surrounded by that, but the sins of his father were not and are not his sins. So it's always something that's fascinated me that you have members, honest and upstanding members of the Board of Trade, attorneys, doctors, dentists, practicing in all sorts of different professional areas of life, who may have had their tuition paid by organized crime money, but that wasn't their fault either. And they are upstanding members of society, perhaps because of what they saw.
Really, yeah. The Spilotro family, they are they just they say it all from what you said. Tony was nothing but a stone mobster. That's all he ever was. He got a brother who's a dentist, who's always been a dentist, real well known, well respected, well liked dentist in Chicago. He's got Michael, who was an actor, but yet must have dipped his toe into the mob stuff, but not like Tony did. And then you've got John, who was, he was just around. It seemed like he must be in the family dynamics. He must have been the lost child or something. The mascot. I don't know.
But not the black sheep, because he certainly didn't go
Right.
clean in his life.
So it's a really interesting family, and it's one that I would imagine, if your name's Spilotro, most any place in the United States, almost, if you when you say it, somebody's gonna say, "Oh, are you the kin to that guy in Las Vegas?"
Well, the Casino movie certainly helped
Yeah,
prop up that legacy for
yeah.
sure.
Yeah, and they didn't use the name Spilotro, but that character that Joe Pesci
Didn't
played,
have
there's
to,
no
but
doubt in anybody's mind, but that was Tony Spilotro. He nailed him. And then, since then that Frank Culata, who worked with them, became such a personality and was all over the internet, and really kept all that going for quite a while. And so it's it's a hell of a story.
still love to interview Colada. A few times in Las Vegas, we would go out there and do
Yeah,
TV interview, and I just have this vision of Frank Colada being escorted down a hotel hallway to our interview, and he would have these security guards that he hired on each
yeah.
side of him, holding on to his elbow, walking him into the room. He wasn't witness protection at that point, as we all know, but he certainly liked playing that part.
Yes, he did. He did. And then he ended up having a mob tour out there. Go figure. Frank Calabrese Jr., he had a mob tour in Chicago, and he's out in Las Vegas as the resident mobster now. So,
He does a really incredible job with that mob presentation. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but I mean, he's the busiest man in show business in Vegas these days. He does 4 or 5 of these things a day,
yeah.
and by the end of the day, he's exhausted, and he does it 5 days a week at the Mob
Yeah.
Museum.
And then in between, I was just talking to Jeff Schumacher, who's a program director out there, and he said in between he goes around and greets people and talks to them, and I've talked to more than one person that's come back and said, "Oh yeah, I ran into him, I talked to him, a nice guy."
We were just out there a couple of months ago interviewing him and Schumacher for a story that we worked up on the 50th anniversary of Sam Giancana's murder.
Oh yeah,
And so that's where I just saw the Frank Calabrese Senior or Junior rather presentation, and people eat it up. That's for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. And he's so personal. He's I know him myself. Talked to him several times. Interviewed him once, and he really seemed like just a nice guy. And I think he was just somebody that just caught up in family dynamics and didn't have a choice in what happened in his life. So you mentioned Giancana. If I remember right, you've got a pretty good Giancana story yourself.
Set out rather here at NBC Chicago to just do a 50th anniversary piece in the month of May. The anniversary happened obviously in June, but we put it on the air in May. Set out to do a story about the Giancana killing and what we know 50 years later. And as it turned out along the way, we had former federal prosecutors and FBI agents and documents that showed it really is not an unsolved case. It's still an open case legally because the person who pulled the trigger is dead. But we did a story that pointed the finger in the eyes of the feds straight at Tony Accardo, and that he was the guy who was allowed into Giancana's basement apartment that night, and that Tony Accardo personally pulled the trigger on Sam Giancana and then left, and that the feds are satisfied that case was closed in their own minds, with Accardo being the trigger man. The reaction to it in some mob watcher circles here in Chicago, interesting.
Oh
So,
yeah, oh yeah. I've seen those. I have seen those reactions. Now, who was his his driver that came back that
Butch
night and left.
Blasey.
Was he Butch Blasey? That's who I had always suspected.
Oh, and that certainly is what the word had been, with really no proof.
Yeah.
And there is proof of the Accardo involved
Okay.
in it, and that's what one of the things that we put into our reporting is that the Accardo home is located a straight shot across a couple of suburbs from where Giancana lived.
Yeah.
And the FBI had Accardo under surveillance at the time, and Accardo left shortly before the Giancana murder happened and returned hours afterward. And that's one of the pieces of evidence that these federal prosecutors cited. It's interesting because people in Chicago know of Operation Family Secrets. It was the last big mob murder prosecution here 20 years ago or so. And the feds solved almost 20 gangland hits as part of that prosecution. What we found out is that the Giancana murder was one of the unstated murders that they also solved. They made a tactical decision, the prosecutor's office, not to throw everything at the jury. And that Giancana's murder was one of those that they held back on because they didn't have any defendants connected to it. So they weren't just going to put it out there for publicity's sake.
Yeah, and muddy up the works on their trial. Those federal prosecutors do not like to muddy up the works. They want to keep it laser focused.
I mean, they did solve 18 murders, and even that was a heavy lift for the jury to sort through all of that in a multi-defendant case.
Plus, the publicity of something like the Giancana murder would just go wild. It would go crazy in the middle of all that. That's wild. Well, Anthony Accardo, I'll be darned. And there's good solid evidence that he did that. When a part of it would be that he was under surveillance and he was missing, and then he came back. They must have had like a fixed surveillance on him. They weren't trying to follow him.
They did have a fixed surveillance on his house, and it was a couple of miles away.
Yeah.
This was at a time when the feds and Chicago police spent a lot more money on 24-hour surveillance than they would today.
Yeah.
In cases like this, it was more commonplace than not for local intelligence units and the FBI to put people under surveillance if they knew that they were running some organized crime racket.
Yeah. And if they knew there was something might happen too, that you get some intelligence that some tip to something might happen while you really lock down on them. Which brings up the point, and this is a much disputed point, and I've gotten arguments with the guys, arguments, not really arguments, but discussions about, wasn't there surveillance on Sam Giancana? And everybody claims that there was, and they were mysteriously pulled off. And my claim is, maybe there was, maybe there wasn't, but if you ever sat on a house where nothing happens all night long, you might drift off. You might run and get something to eat. You might go buy a pack of smokes. You might go get some coffee and then come back by, or you might just, maybe even go to sleep. So I don't know. What do you learn about that?
It was a Chicago police detail that was assigned to the Giancana surveillance, and I don't know that it was as much they were pulled off by somebody as it was 10:30 at night. They had been sitting on the house all day. They saw people coming in, including one of Giancana's daughters, bringing the infamous sausage and escarole over that Sam was cooking just as he was shot. But it may well have been that those people who the surveillance team saw go in, they left at 10:30 or 10:45 that night. And so the surveillance team called it a night, figuring that nothing else was going to happen. And from where they were sitting, it's not real clear whether they would have seen Tony Accardo go down the stairs from the driveway into the basement or not. So who knows whether they were still there at the time or not. They may have been around the corner having a beer.
Yeah. And that happens, folks. That happens.
Sure.
I had a young detective that left early, and the guy she was watching at a bar, he came out and he was mad at the cleaners next door, and he had a Molotov cocktail and he threw it into the cleaners' windows. And we were supposed to be there. We were supposed to be there, and she just got bored and it took off early, which everybody's done at one time or another. I have to admit, I have too. And we had a homeless guy down the street that saw all this go down. That's how we know. So it happens, folks. It happens.
Well, the cops and robbers shows on TV,
Yeah.
the way that they portray surveillance, you pull up, you wait for 15 seconds, and whatever you're supposed to be looking for happens. Well, that
Yeah.
doesn't happen in real life.
It does not happen like that. Trust me, it does not happen. I've been on too many of them. So, I guess I have one comment about that and kind of my knowledge of the mob and look at a lot of wiretaps out of Kansas City here, that like when Iupa was gonna meet with Nick Savella up in Chicago, they were gonna meet at Nick Savella's nephew's place. A guy named George Schiavola lived, north side up there somewhere kinda close to Wrigley Field, actually. And he was on the phone, and he told him to prepare a table with some antipasto and certain a lambrusco, I think, certain kind of wine, and get this all set. And these guys, when they're gonna have some kind of a sit down, they often do have some kind of food like this. It's like part and parcel of it. When they had a meeting that they brought these guys from Las Vegas, Joe Augusto and the Peckerwood, Carl Thomas, when they brought Carl Thomas and Joe Augusto here, why they had one of their wives cook spaghetti and meatballs and had it sitting down in this room, and they kept saying, "Well, Carl, you want some spaghetti and meatballs? They're really good." And he kept saying, "No, no, man, I got to meet a guy in San Francisco later tonight, so they're expecting me out there." And so it's common for them to some kind of a meeting to have some food prepared for that. So that he was expecting somebody to have come that would be some kind of a mob meeting, I would say.
If you look at the weight that some of these outfit characters walk around with, it's easy
Yeah.
to understand how pasta is at every meeting.
Really. Now, when you went to Strawman trials, I'm curious, did you happen to be were you in the courtroom very much?
I was in the courtroom every day. Though that was back in the days when TV news had unlimited budgets, and we could
Yeah.
go someplace and spend a month working on a story, a trial like that. So I was there every day.
Did you happen to see Ken Ito testify?
I did.
I thought that was interesting. I found the picture there. You see the picture there?
Yeah.
Yeah, that picture, they had that picture, they showed that to Ken Ito, and then he pointed out how he knew Iupa and he knew, Joey Lombardo and, Jackie Cerrone and what he knew about him in order to, were you there that day?
Yeah. Vince Solano. Yeah, that was quite a day. The Ito story. I mean, there aren't many Chicago outfit stories that can rival the Ken Ito story and how he
No.
survived gangland hits.
Oh, man, I know. Hit him in the head several times, and didn't it? And I've got his affidavit here, actually, and he says things like, how Joey Iupa was a territorial boss for the organized crime family or outfit in Chicago. He had control of Cicero. He said Iupa even asked him to go to St. Louis back in the '60s and teach somebody how to run policy. And I was talking to a St. Louis guy here not too long ago, and they said, "Oh my God, I never knew that before." So I mean, he really laid it down.
The Strawman case with Iupa showing up every day in a taxi cab and getting out of the cab and having the taxi driver get his walker out of the trunk,
Yeah,
and Iupa would slowly make his way up those front steps. And I mean, I think it might have been before they had a ramp even at the
yeah, it
federal
probably
courthouse.
was. Yeah.
And it was great for the TV cameras because Iupa moved so slowly that we ended up every day with 3 or 4 minutes of video of him.
Seemed like he took a swipe at you guys in one little bit of video I saw online.
He was an ornery guy, that is for certain.
Yeah, I tell you what, Ken Ito, they used him, folks, and you remember, Chuck, they used him to say, "Yeah, there's a mafia, and here's how it works," is what they
Yeah.
used him for.
Boy, that can you imagine being on that task force back then, and you find out that Ken Ito has survived a gangland assassination attempt, and his head's bandaged up, and he wants to talk to agents.
Oh man,
It
I
doesn't
know.
happen.
I interviewed that agent, Elaine Smith, who had been
Right.
she was one of the agents that kept going and knocking on his door. You know how agents do; they like go out and knock on their door periodically. And so he said, "Hey, I want to talk to Elaine Smith." They called her on vacation. She flew back immediately. He was huge. He was huge.
Well, Ken Ito died before he could parlay his story into a windfall for his
Yeah.
family. There was an attempt to try to make something of that, from a book to Hollywood screenplays, and unfortunately for Ito and his family, he died before that could all be put together.
Yeah, I started looking for him when I was doing podcasts, and he hadn't died not too long ago down in Georgia or somewhere. He
Right.
laid low down in Georgia, I believe. He had a heck of a story. I thought, well, that'd be a good interview to get.
You're good.
But yeah, he was. I mean, for those of you that don't know out there, Ken Ito was a Japanese American. He did a little bit of time in the camps during World War II and ended up in Chicago and really ended up describe his position, I'd say, in the outfit as far as their gambling rackets were concerned. Chuck?
Well, I think he was considered to be the street boss, Rush Street, mostly near North Side gambling rackets, and he was this fairly quiet, unassuming Asian man. And but when he showed up at your doorstep, he let it be known who he was representing, and he was well connected and trusted by the outfit. And so when he ended up surviving that hit, there was some trepidation in the higher ranks of the Chicago mob, because they knew that Ken Ito knew a lot.
Yeah. Oh yeah. As it says here, he's talking about who Joey Lombardo's connected to. He said he was just below Cerrone and Iupa in the organizational hierarchy. He'd performed hits and murders for the organization. And, he used those kind of words that juries really like to hear in order. He became a made man and that kind of thing. So it was devastating as far as making them into a mafia family. He says, I also knew Angelo La Pietra, known to me as being a vicious and sadistic killer. He really had a way with words on that, didn't he?
Angelo La Pietra was not known as the Hook for no reason. He
Yeah.
he had quite a reputation in outfit circles.
So, Chuck, what are you working on today?
Just wrapped up the Jimmy Hoffa coverage. 1975 was a big year in
Yeah.
gangland Chicago and America. Of course, it was less than a month or so, or the next month after Sam Giancana was killed, that Jimmy Hoffa vanished. And so I went to Detroit, spent a few days, and did a couple of interviews with former FBI head of the task force on Jimmy Hoffa. Also interviewed a couple of reformed Detroit mob figures about what happened to Hoffa. And while it's not quite as strong as the Giancana evidence, there's certainly a lot of thinking that the feds know and knew exactly what happened to Hoffa, but everybody involved in it is long dead. And so that case is never going to result in a prosecution either.
Yes.
Tell me.
I believe that people do know what happened to Jimmy Hoffa. We know who perpetuated it and how it was done.
Yeah, that my friend Scott Bernstein from in Detroit has done a thing on this, and it sounds, and he's got that taco that the last of the taco family, I think, in Detroit that he's working with. Did you? I assume you interviewed him, didn't you?
Yeah, Novi Taco, or as they pronounce it there, Toco. Which I had to be corrected on, because in Chicago we had a guy named Albert Caesar Taco, spelled the same way, Tocco. Yeah. But in Detroit, I guess the family has long pronounced it Toco.
Okay, all right. I've gotten in trouble. I pronounced it taco because I got in huge trouble one time on the internet because you don't know how to pronounce anything.
Everybody's got an opinion, right?
I mean, you know what they say. Yeah, that's an interesting story that it kind of makes more sense to me. I mean, Dan Moldea, who wrote the book, the Hoffa Wars, and he's so 100% sure about the taking the body back east. I always struggled with that one, taking the body back east.
Yeah, but he certainly is convinced, as are some other people, that the body is still in that landfill in New Jersey.
Yeah, oh yeah, no doubt about it. But I think this new evidence that he's probably was what was he incinerated or something up in Detroit.
There was a gangland Detroit mafia run sanitation company at the time. That the belief is among many federal lawmen from back then that Hoffa's body, shortly after he was grabbed from the restaurant parking lot, he was killed and then taken to this disposal plant, and there was nothing left of him in very short order. That there was no cross-country trip and burial in a landfill, and but Dan and others are they're passionate about their belief that the body's still there on the ground.
Yes, they are. All right, Chuck Goudie from Chicago. I really appreciate you coming on the show, Chuck. This has been fun. And it's a pleasure.
Gary, anytime. You know, the mob here may be smaller, but there's still stories that come up. So always don't hesitate to call.
Okay, I will. Thanks a lot, Chuck.
All right. Take care.
All right. Don't forget, I like to ride motorcycles. So when you're out on the streets there in your big F-150, watch out for those little motorcycles when you're out. If you have a problem with PTSD and you've been in the service, be sure and go to the VA website, and they'll help with your drugs and alcohol problem if you got that problem, or gambling. If not, you can go to Anthony Ruggiano. He's a counselor down in Florida. He's got a hotline on his website. If you got a problem with gambling, most states will have, if you have gambling, most states will have a hotline number to call. Just have to search around for it. I've always got stuff to sell. I got my books, I got my movies. They're all on Amazon. Just go and I got links down below in the show notes, and just go to my Amazon sales page, and you can figure out what to do. I really appreciate y'all tuning in, and we'll keep coming back and doing this. Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys. Thanks, guys.